The Show Me Cannabis Podcast.
Hi YouTube, this is Show Me Cannabis Executive Director John Payne. This week we're going to be talking about police militarization. Over the last couple of weeks we've seen police in armored personnel carriers and other military type equipment patrolling the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, and many people have asked how we got here. Well, the answer is that a lot of our drug war policies have allowed our police to become more like the military. And so that's what we're going to be talking about this week in the podcast. Currently in the United States, SWAT teams execute about 50,000 raids on Americans every year. But we have to go back and look at how SWAT teams came to exist to understand the roots of police militarization. So back in 1965, there was a number of riots in Los Angeles in the neighborhood of Watts. And there was a lot of police officers that were shot at during those riots, and so former Los Angeles Police Department Chief Daryl Gates decided that he would create a team that was organized along military lines to deal specifically with these situations. And after a long series of name changes, they eventually settled on SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics. And these teams were responsible for responding to violent events like hostage situations, snipers, and in some cases riots. However, there was a lot of times where those situations didn't come up. They're very rare situations. So as SWAT teams spread across the country in the 1970s and 80s, the department started to look for different ways that they could use them more routinely. And the drug war provided the perfect opportunity to do that. It allowed them to deploy the SWAT teams thousands of times a year to serve primarily routine drug warrants. And so by 1995, you actually had 75% of all SWAT raids being used to serve drug warrants exclusively. Not there for anything else, just to serve drug warrants. And so we've seen how this policy that was originally meant to cover just violent situations has really started to go into something that is creating a violent situation in and of itself. The federal government also bears a great deal of responsibility for militarizing our police forces. During the 80s and the 90s, they created a number of different grant programs that would allow local departments to purchase military surplus equipment to help fight the war on drugs. In particular, the BURN grants and also the Community-Oriented Policing Services grants, which have primarily been used to fund SWAT teams. Now, there's a big irony there that community policing to a lot of local departments means the SWAT teams. Also, in the National Defense Authorization Act, there is now a new part that's called Section 1033 that forces these departments to use this military equipment within at least 1 year or they will lose it. And obviously, a riot, a hostage situation, that's not going to happen necessarily within a year, so you're going to look for routine ways that you can use it. And often that means serving drug warrants. Police departments will often say that they need this sort of military equipment because they're dealing with potentially very dangerous criminals, but the statistics belie that notion. For instance, in Missouri, drug task forces serve a lot of our drug search warrants, and in 60% of cases, they only make arrests for possession, not for distribution. Also, according to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, they only recover weapons in about 20% of these cases. So in a country where 1/3 of our population owns guns, they would be doing better if they were just kicking in doors at random to find weapons. So we can see that we're not really dealing with Tony Montana or Pablo Escobar here in most of these cases. This is mostly low-level drug offenders who are having their doors kicked in. And in fact, we can look at a case here locally in Missouri, in Columbia, Missouri, where a man was arrested and his dogs were shot by the Columbia SWAT team after his door was kicked in, and the police found nothing but a grinder with trace amounts of cannabis on it. Clearly, we do not need this sort of overkill to enforce laws on low-level drug offenders. Ending the war on drugs would allow us to get rid of a lot of this police militarization and de-escalate what a lot of people see as a war on the American people. The war on drugs has to have a human enemy, and so many people in the United States feel that they are that enemy, and that our police forces no longer exist to protect and serve, but to fight them. So if we got rid of the war on drugs, we could get rid of this military style of policing and go back to where police were really public servants and more like Andy Griffith than Darth Vader. Thanks for joining us this week, and I'd like to encourage those of you who live in the St. Louis and Jefferson County area to join us this next week at our Arnold Town Hall meeting at the Arnold Recreation Center at 6:30. That's at 1695 Missouri State Road. Speakers will include myself, Police Sergeant Gary Wiegert, and also Mike Colonna, who's a state representative and has introduced medical cannabis and hemp legislation in the past. I hope to see you there, and I hope that you will like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel, and see you next week.
Show Me Cannabis, fighting to reform Missouri cannabis laws. Find us at show-mecannabis.com, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Together, we can reform Missouri cannabis law.